Imagine you're in a small smoky nightclub in the mid-1970s. Seats packed, lights low. The chatter stills as a lanky young man with flowing hair steps onto the stage. There's an electric hum in the air, a sense that something extraordinary is about to happen. Then, seemingly without effort, he summons a kaleidoscope of sound from his guitar. Rock, funk, jazz, blues, fusion, all swirling together in an explosive display of talent. By the end of the night, the crowd is on its feet. Word of this rising star, a certain Tommy Bolin, starts spreading like wildfire. In that moment, you might think you've just witnessed a brand new legend take flight, and you'd be right, except for the heartbreaking fact that this legend would extinguish itself far too soon. Though many music fans have heard his guitar licks without ever knowing his name, Tommy Bolin's influence deserves more recognition. Some recall him for stepping into shoes once filled by Ritchie Blackmore in Deep Purple, a nearly impossible assignment. But that's just scratching the surface of his story. Bolin was more than a replacement guitarist or a rock and roll sidekick. He was a musical wanderer who refused to be confined by a single genre. Those who knew him best described him as an open-hearted artist with a taste for adventure, constantly looking for new sounds to meld with his guitar's voice. Tommy Bolin was born Thomas Richard Bolin on August 1st, 1951, in Sioux City, Iowa. It's not exactly the first place you might imagine a future rock guitar hero to emerge from, especially in the 1950s, when small-town America was more about farmland and tradition than about experimental musical careers. Yet from his earliest years, Tommy was restless, curious, and thrilled by the transformative power of music. His parents weren't professional musicians, but they did notice how their son gravitated toward rhythms on the radio, tapping out beats on pots and pans long before he got his first real instrument. By the age of 13, Tommy was already making waves in the local scene. He formed a band called the Misirloos, playing school dances and teen centers, standing out as this wiry kid whose hands moved faster on the fretboard than anyone could keep track of. He devoured everything he could find: 50s rock and roll, the emerging rock from the British invasion, American blues, and jazz records he picked up from older friends. Word spread through Sioux City that this teenage guitarist was something special, and local clubs started inviting him to jam with older bands. In the late 1960s, with the world in a cultural upheaval, protests, Woodstock, the Beatles forging new sounds, teenage Tommy decided that the Midwest was too small for his ambition. At 15, he left Sioux City for Denver, a bigger stage for his talent. The move seemed reckless to some, but for Tommy, it was inevitable. Denver offered a vibrant music scene that was more open to experimentation. There, he quickly found himself with a group called American Standard, and not long after, he joined the band Zephyr. Still a teenager, he dazzled local audiences and hungry record executives, appearing on Zephyr's self-titled 1969 album. Although Zephyr never became a mainstream success, fans who discovered Bolin from those records described his guitar work as transcendent, a flavor of virtuosity that echoed jazz and rock, but refused to be pinned down as either one. While Zephyr toiled on the regional circuit, Tommy's reputation reached the ears of bigger names. In the early 1970s, he left Zephyr and poured his restless energy into a project called Energy, which blended jazz fusion, rock, and even funk elements. They never quite hit commercial success, but his flamboyant playing style caught the attention of established fusion drummer Billy Cobham. Cobham was putting together a bold, genre-bending album called Spectrum, 1973, a record that would help define jazz fusion for decades to come. Tommy's contributions to Spectrum were eye-opening. Here was a young guitarist stepping confidently into a session with a jazz luminary, unleashing a flurry of notes that had the fluidity of jazz lines but the raw power of rock. Some listeners, including other top guitarists of the era, thought they were hearing John McLaughlin or Jeff Beck. But no, it was that kid from Sioux City named Tommy Bolin. At this point, industry insiders were starting to say Bolin could be the next big thing. His playing on Spectrum impressed a wide swath of musicians, and soon more eyes turned toward him. One account mentions that when Jeff Beck heard the album for the first time, he was surprised to learn that the unfamiliar guitarist's name wasn't already in neon lights. Still, despite the buzz in musical circles, Tommy remained more of a word-of-mouth legend than a household name. That was about to change when the James Gang, an American rock outfit that had launched Joe Walsh's career, came calling. Walsh had recently departed for a solo career, and the band needed someone brilliant to fill the gap. Tommy stepped in, and for 2 albums, Bang, 1973, and Miami, 1974, he injected new life into the James Gang sound. Though he was still honing his songwriting, his guitar work was unstoppable. Those who worked alongside him marveled at his creative energy. Whether it was a late-night jam session in a dingy practice room or a more polished studio date, Bolin's approach stayed fresh and spontaneous. Sometimes he'd layer intricate melodies. Other times, he'd tear through scorching solos that took your breath away. The band's new material showcased a heavier, funk-infused style that distinguished it from Walsh's era. Still, the James Gang struggled to recapture the commercial success they'd had in earlier years, and Tommy eventually parted ways. Restless and eager to carve out his own path, he drifted back into session work and tinkered with a potential solo album. But fate had other plans, some would say bigger plans, and they carried him across the ocean to one of the most famous rock groups on Earth. Deep Purple was a titan of early hard rock, known for epic riffs and volatile personalities. By 1975, longtime guitarist Ritchie Blackmore, whose iconic riffs shaped songs like Smoke on the Water and Highway Star, had parted ways with the band. For a while, it seemed Deep Purple might crumble. The rest of the group considered various replacements, with each new candidate coming up short. Then, whispers reached them about a young American who could play with the expressive flair of a jazz man and the bombast of a rock star. Some of the members were skeptical. Could this unknown from the Midwest really fill the shoes of the temperamental but brilliant Blackmore? But after hearing Tommy audition, they realized they were dealing with a rare talent, one who could bring an entirely new color palette to Deep Purple's music. Recording Come Taste the Band in 1975 was a whirlwind experience for the group. Tommy's imaginative solos and sense of groove electrified the studio. He introduced a funkiness to the riffs and an experimental feel to the arrangements. Unlike anything the band had attempted before, songs like Gettin' Tighter exemplified his style, unpredictable, soulful, and joyfully reckless. While some die-hard fans of the old Deep Purple lineup weren't sure what to make of the new direction, others found it exciting. It was as if the band had pressed the refresh button, plugging into a new brand of energy that was more nuanced and, at times, more daring. Yet with that new spark came hidden darkness. Tommy had been dabbling in drugs for years, but now the demands of international touring, the pressure to prove himself in a legendary band, and the wild temptations of the 1970s. Rock World intensified those issues. During the Come Taste the Band tour, cracks began to show. Some nights, Tommy played like a man possessed, wowing audiences who'd never heard Deep Purple sound quite so funky and uninhibited. Other nights, substance use took a toll on his focus, and performances would falter. Rumors circulated that sometimes he was barely able to stand on stage. The rest of the band grew frustrated. Here was a gifted musician who could either ignite the stage or burn it down. One of the most harrowing incidents occurred in Indonesia. On a tour date in December 1975, Deep Purple's trip ended in chaos when the promoter tried to cheat them out of money, leading to tension with local authorities. Tommy, in a desperate attempt to numb his anxiety, is said to have overindulged in drugs. By the end of that trip, the band was not only dealing with a potential political crisis, but also a guitarist who was slipping into deeper dependency. Deep Purple's last days with Tommy ended in a swirl of internal disagreements, unreliable performances, and the overshadowing presence of his addiction. Eventually, the group disbanded, and it was a grim end to one of rock's greatest acts. Still, Tommy refused to give up. He'd set his sights on a solo career that could capture the creative freedom he'd long desired. In 1976, Tommy Bolin poured his heart into Private Eyes, his second solo album. It featured a melange of styles, beautiful acoustic ballads, hard-hitting rockers, and shimmering fusion pieces. Some tracks revealed how deeply he'd been influenced by jazz, while others leaned toward a soulful R&B sound. He sang on several numbers, showcasing a vulnerable, often overlooked vocal talent. Behind the scenes, however, he was fighting demons. Accounts from those studio sessions paint Tommy as both enthusiastic and erratic, one moment bounding around, crafting new riffs, the next moment disappearing into a haze of substance use. Friends and collaborators tried to help, but he pushed them away, convinced that he could handle it all himself. For an artist on the brink of potential superstardom, Tommy carried an unsettling weight of loneliness. He was the new kid in the big leagues, the guitarist who had walked in Ritchie Blackmore's shadow, who got tongues wagging among jazz fusion connoisseurs, but he still felt unmoored. Family members later spoke of how he would call home at odd hours, voice trembling with self-doubt. He wanted so badly to break through with his own voice, free from comparisons. Yet he was also a 25-year-old struggling with the same pressure that had undone so many bright talents of that era. Drugs, travel exhaustion, financial woes, the temptation to live large every night, because that's what everyone else seemed to expect from a rock star. One lesser-known incident reveals how dire Tommy's physical state could become. During a tour, he reportedly fell asleep in an awkward position after using drugs, woke up with partial numbness in his arm, and couldn't play properly for days. But each time he rallied back on stage as if powered by the music itself. There's a heart-rending irony in that. By nearly all accounts, Tommy's artistry was unstoppable when he was in the zone. But that very state of transcendence seemed to drive him deeper into destructive habits. He was also pushing his limits in other ways, exploring everything from classical lines to funk rhythms in his practice sessions. Bandmates and session players recalled him staying up into the early hours, headphones on, meticulously layering guitar overdubs or rewriting an arrangement he felt needed more sparkle. He'd say things like, "Let's mix that squeal with a jazz chord," or "What if we double the bass line with a wah-wah guitar part?" Creativity poured from him like a force of nature until the dark side of the rock lifestyle pulled him back under. Nevertheless, there was a buzz around the Private Eyes album release. Some critics recognized it as a bold statement from a guitarist who'd just begun to hit his stride. Tommy embarked on a tour to support the record, hoping to prove not only to the world, but maybe to himself that he could lead a band and captivate an audience on his own merits. For a few shows, it worked like a charm. Even as his health fluctuated, the music soared. Listeners emerged from the concerts shaking their heads in disbelief. How is this guy not one of the biggest names in rock yet? The tragic answer arrived on December 3rd, 1976 in Miami. Tommy played an opening set for Jeff Beck, delivering what some described as the performance of his life. He commanded the stage with swagger and heart, playing extended solos that teetered between raw rock fury and tender jazz flourishes. After the show, he was all smiles backstage, excited about the positive response. It seemed like a breakthrough moment. Tommy Bolin was stepping out of the shadows and into a future brimming with possibility. But later that night, in the solitude of his hotel room, the well-worn cycle repeated itself. Tommy combined heroin, sleeping pills, and possibly other opiates. By morning, when friends knocked on his door, he wasn't breathing. The official cause was multiple drug intoxication, a lethal blend in an already exhausted body. He was just 25. The shockwaves traveled far. Fellow musicians who'd regarded Tommy as a sort of hidden gem were stunned and devastated. Fans realized they had lost someone truly special, whose best work might still have been waiting to be written. In the years since, there have been tributes of various kinds. A posthumous compilation of his recordings from the band Energy eventually surfaced, offering more glimpses into his unsung brilliance. Musicians ranging from jazz fusion circles to classic rock icons have cited him as an influence or have praised his adventurous spirit. His brother Johnny Bolin dedicated efforts to preserving Tommy's legacy, organizing tribute shows, and working with fan clubs to keep the memory alive. Even among Deep Purple devotees, some of the most ardent supporters you'll find, there's a growing appreciation for Come Taste the Band and the way it captures a fleeting moment of synergy between Tommy's boundary-pushing style and the band's established hard rock groove. Some critics question the lack of discipline in his playing, pointing out occasional sloppy live moments or inconsistent sets. Others claim that was simply part of Tommy's appeal, his spontaneity and willingness to walk the tightrope, perhaps in an era that was more accepting of an artist's personal struggles. He might have had a stronger support system. But in the 1970s, the culture of partying was as much a part of rock and roll as the music itself. Tommy, like many others, got caught up in that destructive myth of invincibility. On a personal level, Tommy's life and untimely death serve as a cautionary tale. The 1970s were rife with overindulgence, and many of his peers fell into similar traps. But his story also highlights how quickly the pressure of fame, or near fame, can unravel someone, especially someone as sensitive and artistically inclined as Tommy. There's a vulnerability in his journey. He was a small-town kid who soared fast, never fully grounding himself. To an older audience reflecting on that era, Tommy Bolin stands as a figure who encapsulated both the magic and the perils of rock's golden age. We might also glean from his story the importance of nurturing talent with care. In a different situation with more stable mentorship and less chaotic touring schedules, perhaps Tommy's trajectory would have been different. He was a musician with a restless soul, forever chasing the next chord progression or the next rhythm that might set his imagination aflame. That kind of spirit needs room to grow, not just in the sense of having creative freedom, but also in the sense of having a strong personal foundation. Yet, it's easy in hindsight to say that. The reality of life on the road in the 1970s was gritty, unpredictable, and often destructive. Musicians lived in a constant swirl of adoration, temptation, and exhaustion. If you were young, gifted, and prone to pushing boundaries, the lure of escape in a drug-fueled haze could be overwhelming. And Tommy Bolin wasn't the first nor the last to succumb. He joined a tragic club of artists, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, and others, who seemed to burn at both ends until they were gone. Still, in the end, it might be more constructive to remember the luminous spark he left behind than to dwell solely on the downward spiral. In interviews with those who spent time with him, you often hear about his big laugh, his kindness to strangers, and the way he'd get lost in playing the guitar like a child lost in play. There was a warmth to him, a desire to connect through music that came through in every note. Maybe that's why, decades after his death, his fans remained fiercely loyal, gathering online or at tribute concerts to celebrate a life that ended too soon. Today, his name may not be as widely recognized as some of his contemporaries, but mention him to serious musicians or rock historians, and you'll often receive a nod of admiration. They'll talk about the melodic sense he brought to a raging guitar solo, the risk-taking spirit that colored everything he did. The fact that his discography is relatively small, a couple of band albums with the James Gang, one classic Deep Purple record, and 2 official solo releases, only sharpens that sense of potential unfulfilled. Sometimes, all you need to fall in love with Tommy Bolin's playing is a single track, such as Teaser or Lotus, or one of his mesmerizing fusion jams from Spectrum. After that, you might find yourself combing through bootleg recordings, searching for more scraps of that inimitable sound. Bolin's story also nudges us to think about how quickly life can change course. He spent his final day riding a high of achievement, stepping off that stage in Miami to cheers and applause, only to lose everything within hours. That duality, extraordinary triumph colliding with final tragedy, encapsulates the roller coaster of an era that both made and destroyed countless artists. For older viewers who remember the headlines from that time, it's a chilling reminder of how ephemeral rock stardom could be. For younger folks, it's a sobering tale that warns of repeating the same mistakes if they don't learn from history. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.